The interwar years in Britain were a time of excess, rebellion, and reinvention. In the 1930s, the bright young things dazzled high society, flamboyant aristocrats and artists who turned London into their playground, living for the thrill of the moment. Among them was Diana Mitford, a woman so strikingly beautiful and irresistibly charming that even her critics couldn't deny her allure. The fourth born of 7 children, she was one of the famed Mitford sisters, whose lives captivated London's elite and have fascinated history lovers for decades. Admired, envied, and seemingly destined for a life of privilege, Diana had everything: wealth, status, and a celebrated marriage to a wealthy aristocrat. But then, seemingly without provocation, she threw it all away. Diana abandoned her marriage, her social standing, and even her ties to her sisters for one man, Sir Oswald Mosley. For her, it wasn't just love, it was ideology. Her devotion to Mosley led her to embrace fascism, drawing her into the orbit of Hitler himself. As the world stood on the brink of war, she aligned herself with a cause that was doomed to fail, sacrificing her family, reputation, and homeland in the process. Join us as we unravel the life, scandals, fleeting triumphs, and ultimate downfall of Diana Mitford, a woman unwavering in her convictions and unrepentant until the very end. Diana Freeman Mitford entered the world on June 17, 1910, amid an atmosphere of disappointment and exhaustion. Her mother, Sydney, later known to her children as Mov, had endured a difficult labor, and the expectation of a son had been so strong that the unborn child had been referred to as him. When Diana arrived instead, her mother wept, overcome with both physical fatigue and the dashed hope of balancing the family's gender ratio. Her father, David, known to the children as Favre, met the news with indifference, viewing another daughter as an unremarkable addition to their growing household. Already parents to 2 girls, Nancy and Pamela. Sydney and David had longed for a second son to accompany their only boy, Tom, who had been born just 10 months prior. Sydney had dreamed of raising a brood of boys, with perhaps a single daughter. Fate would grant her 6 daughters and only 1 son. As the household gathered to greet the newborn, the nurse ominously remarked that Diana was too beautiful to live long, a superstitious notion that foreshadowed the intensity with which Diana would later captivate and divide public opinion. Her birth coincided with the end of the Edwardian era, marked by nostalgia and change. Her father, David Freeman Mitford, struggled financially, relying on his wife Sydney's wealthy father, Thomas Gibson Bowles, a self-made journalist. The family's fortunes fluctuated, forcing them to relocate until David inherited the Redesdale title and estate, briefly improving their standing. Diana's early years at Astall Manor were shaped by literature, family dynamics, and a belief in destiny, reinforced by a vision of angels she experienced as a child. Her education was limited, dictated by her father's belief that schooling made women unattractive and her mother's dismissal of female independence. A governess frequently reminded her of her insignificance, pushing Diana toward a brief but intense religious devotion under a Catholic teacher, Miss Price. Her intellectual growth relied on her sister Nancy's literary influence, though she lacked Nancy's ambition. A bout of appendicitis provided rare familial attention. Diana's beauty captivated admirers, including James Lees Milne, a friend of her brother Tom. James, known to the family as Jim, was a shy and introspective boy who quickly became captivated by Diana's beauty. He silently observed her as she sat beside Tom at the piano, entranced by her presence. Diana, in turn, admired Jim's intellect and shared his disdain for sports, appreciating his preference for classical music, art, and literature. Though their connection deepened, Jim's relationship with Tom ran deeper than mere friendship. Their schoolboy camaraderie concealed a secret affair. Other suitors, like Randolph Churchill, aggressively pursued her, though she remained disinterested. When her cousin Michael Bowles became obsessed with her, her father's fury led to a dramatic confrontation, severing their contact for decades. Her world expanded when she visited Chartwell, Winston Churchill's estate, offering a glimpse into a life beyond Astall. She admired Churchill's intellect and his wife Clementine's poised demeanor, but found Randolph immature despite his relentless pursuit. Chartwell's lively political atmosphere contrasted with her quiet home, exposing her to high-level discussions. She also encountered Brendan Bracken, a brash Irishman rumored to be Churchill's illegitimate son, whom she found untrustworthy. These experiences at Chartwell deepened Diana's fascination with power and influence, setting the stage for her future ambitions. Returning to Astall after her visits to Chartwell, Diana felt stifled by her family's strict control and financial struggles. While Chartwell thrived in luxury, Sydney sold eggs to make ends meet. Diana longed for independence, even fantasizing about running away. By 16, she was aware of societal expectations. She wouldn't need to work, yet her father warned she would inherit nothing. Unlike her mother's blind loyalty to the Conservatives, Diana was drawn to political discussions at Chartwell, where the general strike was taken seriously. Churchill's government-controlled British Gazette unsettled her, revealing how power shaped public perception. After careful reflection, she declared herself a Lloyd George liberal, breaking from her family's Tory roots. Paris offered Diana her first real taste of freedom. The Mitfords temporarily relocated there while waiting for Swinbrook House's completion, economizing in a modest hotel. She caught the attention of artist Paul César Hillot, who likened her to a Greek goddess. Enrolled at the prestigious Cours Fenelon, she thrived socially despite struggling academically. Walking unchaperoned was a thrilling novelty, but returning to England meant resuming strict supervision. In early 1927, Diana returned to Paris, escorted by Winston and Randolph Churchill. She was left in the care of two elderly sisters, but their grim apartment and restrictive environment quickly disillusioned her. Miserable in her basement room, she sought refuge in hotel baths, a luxury that offended her hosts. Embracing her newfound independence, she cut her waist-length hair into a bob, shocking her father, who saw it as a sign of immorality. Hello, though dismayed by her new look, continued mentoring her in art, even sketching a dry point etching of her profile, which gained minor celebrity status at school. Despite Hillot's admiration, Diana encountered indifference from his sculptor friend, Trubetskoy, reminding her that, for all her beauty, she was still a schoolgirl. Madame Hillot provided warmth and hospitality, while Hillot's daughter, Paulette, viewed her with quiet rivalry. Meanwhile, James Lees Milne, struggling with personal tragedy, nostalgically idealized Diana, writing to her as Mona and asking if she had retained her Raphael face. Diana had grown accustomed to admiration, effortlessly toying with Jim's devotion while juggling secret Parisian rendezvous. She pursued Count Charles de Broglie to make Bill Astor jealous, deceiving her chaperones with excuses of violin lessons and sittings for Hillot. Despite her social exploits, she maintained top conduct at Cours Fenelon, but her Parisian idol was shattered by the death of Hillot, her mentor and admirer. Devastated, she mourned the loss of his unwavering praise. Her grief deepened when Paulette Hillot coldly barred her from seeing him before his passing. Returning to England for Easter, Diana was disillusioned by Swinbrook House, a stark, impersonal contrast to Astall Manor. Devoid of warmth, the house lacked even a library, leaving her restless. Seeking intellectual escape, she immersed herself in radical thinkers like Lytton Strachey and Aldous Huxley, defying Sydney's insistence that she spend more time outdoors. Jim's affection provided some distraction, but she dismissed his love, insisting that beauty and art mattered more than sex. As Diana prepared to enter society, she remained an outsider to Nancy and Pamela's Oxford set, observing their flamboyant, theatrical crowd with curiosity. Diana's liberal attitude toward flirtations had always been accompanied by a certain recklessness, but her carelessness ultimately led to her downfall. One afternoon, after writing in her diary at Sydney's desk, she left it open and unattended. Hours later, while walking with Pamela, she realized her mistake and raced home, only to find that it was too late. Sydney had already read its contents. Every detail was laid bare: her sittings with Hillot, her unchaperoned evenings with Charles, and her secret rendezvous with other young men. A furious row erupted, with Sydney accusing Diana of being wanton and declaring nobody would ask you to their houses if they knew half of what you had done. Outraged, Sydney burned the diary and withdrew her from Cours Fenelon, cutting off her newfound independence. Betrayed and humiliated, Diana found no sympathy from her siblings, with Nancy dismissing her as a bundle of sex with no soul, and Tom's disapproval wounding her most. As punishment, she was exiled to Bucks Mill in Devon under her great-aunt Maud's strict watch. Stripped of excitement and stimulation, she found solace only in serialized fiction that mirrored her longing for escape. A neighbor's rare act of kindness granted her the freedom to wander the landscape, but she soon realized no mysterious stranger would rescue her. She would have to shape her own destiny. Meanwhile, Jim, hurt by Diana's silence, turned his attention to Diana Churchill, Winston's melancholic daughter. When he visited Chartwell in September, he saw Diana Mitford bask in the attention of her two most persistent admirers, himself and Randolph Churchill. Feeling sidelined, he watched her gravitate toward more engaging company. Among the guests, she was drawn to the eccentric scientist Frederick Lindemann, whose brilliance captivated her despite his elitist and eugenicist beliefs. He encouraged her studies, even inviting her to visit Christ Church. Before she could accept, Randolph publicly revealed her diary scandal, embarrassing her further. Before leaving Chartwell, Diana attempted to cool Randolph's affections, but his persistence only grew. Undeterred by her indifference, he stubbornly declared, "I love you as much as I ever have." Dismissing both Randolph and Jim, Diana was no longer content with being the object of admiration. She sought a life of meaning, adventure, and control. Diana longed for intellectual growth, but her request to study German was met with David's firm refusal. Tom could, because he was a boy. Frustrated, she found solace in an invitation to her first ball, only to be disillusioned by the dull company and an ill-fitting gown. Her disappointment deepened through Christmas as she endured a string of uninspiring hunt balls. Even the antics of Nancy's bright young things failed to amuse her. She dismissed their excesses as immature and self-indulgent. In 1928, James Lees-Milne's visit to Swinbrook brought hope for stimulating conversation, but Nancy derailed it with a provocation that sent David into an anti-German tirade. Meanwhile, Diana prepared for her societal debut, flawlessly executing her curtsy at Buckingham Palace, though the uninspiring reception left her unimpressed. With her entry into society came the expectation of securing a husband, a path she saw as her only escape, but on her own terms. As her social season unfolded, Diana was chaperoned by Clementine Churchill, staying at the Churchills' Downing Street flat while her parents rented out Rutland Gate. This proximity allowed Randolph Churchill to renew his unwanted pursuit, though Diana gravitated toward older, more sophisticated men. She met the introspective poet Edward James, but he was enthralled to Austrian dancer Tilly Losch, a woman Diana despised for her manipulative nature. A turning point came in May 1928 at a supper party hosted by Lady Violet Astor, where Diana met Bryan Guinness. The heir to the Guinness brewing fortune, Bryan was intelligent, artistic, and deeply romantic. Though he fell in love instantly, Diana did not reciprocate his intensity. That summer, at the Guinness family's grand ball, tragedy struck when two housemates fell through the ballroom's glass ceiling, killing one instantly. Haunted by the event, Bryan found comfort in a chance sighting of Diana in London, convincing himself it was fate. Determined to secure her love, Bryan pursued Diana relentlessly. His heartfelt letters went unanswered until, during a moonlit walk, he finally confessed his feelings and proposed. Diana hesitated, admitting she was fond of him, but dismissing a kiss they shared as meaningless. Bryan was devastated, but the next morning a note arrived. Diana had changed her mind and agreed to marry him. Overjoyed yet uncertain, Bryan replied, "I still don't know how much you love me, but I am altogether glad again." Sidney remained unimpressed, insisting Diana was too young and should wait a year. Seeking to dissuade her, Diana's parents sent her to Scotland, hoping she would consider Angus Malcolm as an alternative match. But Diana, uninterested in rural isolation, rejected him outright. Meanwhile, Bryan fumed in Vienna, jealous of any potential rivals. His worries were unnecessary. She was determined to marry Bryan, not for love, but as her key to adventure, art, and the life she truly wanted. The ceremony itself was a grand spectacle, the wedding of the year, with Handel's Let the Bright Seraphims soaring through St. Margaret's. As she stood at the altar, Bryan looked neat and handsome, but the weight of expectation overwhelmed her. The press celebrated the union, but Sidney remained skeptical of Diana's ability to manage Bryan's immense fortune. At the reception, an Oxford friend's suggestion of traveling to Cappadocia led to their first disagreement. Diana was thrilled. Bryan was indifferent. The next day, they departed for Paris, where Diana, now a married woman, indulged in luxury. At Bryan's family apartment, she revamped her wardrobe with daring designer pieces, imagining Sidney's reaction. From there, they traveled to Sicily, where ancient ruins reignited childhood fantasies of escaping to a Greek island. Enchanted, Diana wrote of her joy in marriage, reveling in their newfound freedom. As Bryan's bar exam approached, they returned to London, where he settled on law as a career, though his true passion remained writing. Diana had successfully secured a life of adventure and wealth, but whether it would bring true fulfillment remained to be seen. Bryan purchased their marital home at 10 Buckingham Street, an expensive Lutyens-designed townhouse, but Diana found it uninspiring. Lady Evelyn's cluttered decor and a garish pink bedroom horrified her. Even wedding gifts felt meaningless. Parental interference was minimal. Colonel Guinness merely advised separate bathrooms, while David sent a Labrador named Rubbish. Before fully settling into marriage, Diana endured a second court presentation, now as Mrs. Bryan Guinness, an experience she found dull. When she casually mentioned wanting a diamond tiara, Bryan surprised her. One was already waiting. Politics barely interested Diana. The 1929 election passed with little thought, though she and Bryan supported Colonel Guinness's campaign. Amused by his reliance on pre-scripted jokes and champagne-fueled speeches, she viewed his political career with detachment. In Berlin, she was unimpressed by its infamous nightlife, but deeply unsettled by Tom Mitford's certainty that Germany would be ruled by either the Nazis or communists. For the wealthy elite, communism was the greater threat. This was her first real exposure to political extremism. Back in London, Diana immersed herself in theater and opera, though the performances soon bored her. Instead, she turned to the people attending them, gaining entry into high society through Emerald Lady Kennard, a formidable hostess whose salon was a hub for London's elite. Diana idolized Lytton Strachey and was awed when he chose to sit beside her, engaging in an all-night conversation. Yet in private, Strachey dismissed her as too young to offer intellectual depth. As aristocratic glamour flourished in the interwar years, Diana's social standing soared. Once mocked by her siblings, she now had everything: wealth, fashion, a townhouse, and an elite social life. Yet true freedom still felt elusive. Inspired by the Tatler, she began hosting extravagant parties, much to Bryan's quiet reluctance. One such event, a tropical-themed riverboat party, attracted London's bright young things, including writer Evelyn Waugh. Initially predisposed to dislike Diana, Waugh observed her from afar, yet unexpectedly he found himself captivated. To Nancy's dismay, history repeated itself. Just as Tom's friends had once been enchanted by Diana, so too was Waugh. 2 days after the party, the Waugh's marriage ended due to Waugh's wife's affair with John Haygate, prompting them to leave their flat at Canonbury Square. Nancy, now without a place to stay, accepted Diana's offer to move into Buckingham Street. Evelyn soon became a frequent visitor, ostensibly to see Nancy, but in reality, drawn by his growing curiosity about Diana. Diana, despite occasional immaturity, was generous, especially to Waugh, who was struggling post-divorce. She invited him to Poole Place, where he found endless amusement in Lady Evelyn's eccentric landscaping and a macabre taxidermy museum that disgusted Diana but delighted him. Nancy, desperate for Waugh's attention, flaunted her literary success, but he remained fixated on Diana. That summer, Diana's final tie to childhood was severed when her beloved dog, Rubbish, returned home mortally injured. Though Bryan gifted her an Irish wolfhound, Pilgrim, it proved a poor replacement. In June, Diana discovered she was pregnant and reacted with indifference, feeling too young for motherhood. Bryan, ecstatic, kept the news secret, savoring his anticipation. In Dublin, he found comfort in impending fatherhood, while Diana found distraction at the Abbey Theatre. As her pregnancy progressed, their social life slowed. Bryan considered buying Biddesden House, but Diana longed for Paris. There, surrounded by Bryan, Nancy, and Waugh, she tolerated the monotony. Waugh's attachment grew as he accompanied Diana on drives and zoo visits, even lying beside her during afternoon naps. Behavior Bryan naively saw as harmless. His love for her surfaced in work suspended, and he dedicated vile bodies to Diana and Bryan, though he later regretted its vulgarity. On the 16th of March 1930, Diana gave birth to Jonathan Guinness. Overjoyed, she rejected Sidney's claim that all babies were ugly. A Churchill-recommended nanny, Higgs, took over childcare, limiting Diana's time with her son. She cherished Higgs's day off, when she was finally allowed to push the pram herself. By summer, Diana eagerly returned to society, but Bryan worried about slipping back into frivolity. Waugh, too, resented her shift in priorities, leading to the slow unraveling of their friendship. Their growing tensions culminated in a physical fight with Randolph Churchill at Buckingham Street. Waugh chronicled their constant quarrels in his diary, and, after one final argument, ended their friendship out of pure jealousy. They never spoke again. Seeking new intellectual company, Diana invited Henry Lamb and Lytton Strachey to Knockmaroon, unaware of their strained history. Strachey, unimpressed by Dublin, endured Diana's packed social calendar with irritation, dismissing Abbey theater performances as inauthentic. His only respite came when illness forced quiet days. That winter, several high-profile deaths cast a shadow over London's bright young things. Seeking escape, Diana and Bryan traveled on the Orient Express, visiting Venice, Greece, and Constantinople. Diana, however, found the exotic filthy and full of beggars, and longed for the familiarity of privilege. Their friendship with Strachey continued, though a visit to his Bloomsbury home left Diana disillusioned. Once enamored with their eccentricity, she now found it cold and contrived. The disastrous visit ended with food poisoning from Dora Carrington's rabbit pie. Bryan's growing presence in Diana's daily life became suffocating. His decision to quit the bar, citing headaches from his wig, was a ploy to spend more time with her. Diana, craving independence, grew uneasy. After Christmas, she discovered she was pregnant again. Bryan was thrilled. Diana resigned, assured him she welcomed the idea of another baby, just not so soon. As she prepared for the birth, she focused on renovating Biddesden, their new country home. Bryan postponed travel to stay with her, but she urged him to go, relishing the solitude. Yet Biddesden had an eerie presence, tied to a vast portrait of General Webb, said to haunt the house if moved. Though she dismissed it at first, strange occurrences unsettled her. Pamela's visit provided reassurance, but even she experienced chilling encounters. Guests, unnerved by the house's spectral presence, refused to return. Diana was fascinated by Dora Carrington's quiet devotion to Lytton Strachey despite his homosexuality. Yet beneath her reserved exterior, Carrington navigated multiple lovers, maintaining control amid Bloomsbury's tangled relationships. As Diana delved deeper into their world, she realized its allure faded up close. Carrington's tragic end came soon after Strachey's death. Visiting Biddesden, she gifted Diana his embroidered silk waistcoat, then borrowed Bryan's gun under the pretense of shooting rabbits. She soon took her own life, leaving Diana devastated. Despite motherhood, Diana remained restless. She gave birth to her second son Desmond in September 1931, indifferent to praise for producing another healthy child. Bryan, ever doting, hoped for a daughter, but Diana, fearing ungainly height like Unity's, was relieved to have another son. As Bryan's devotion grew suffocating, Diana lashed out, then apologized in guilt. He captured his pain in love's isolation, sensing the cracks beneath her polished facade. With Strachey and Carrington gone, Diana questioned her privileged existence. The economic depression unsettled her, but when she voiced concerns, Bryan dismissed them. Despite gaining the right to vote at 21, she abstained, finding no candidate compelling. She longed for someone decisive, a leader to give her purpose. That man arrived in the form of Oswald Mosley. Though they had crossed paths before, Diana had dismissed him. At first, his intensity bored her, but his commanding presence intrigued her. Unlike Bryan, lost in literature, Mosley exuded power and conviction. His privileged but brutal upbringing, military expulsion, and political rise, from conservative MP to Labour defector, had shaped his relentless ambition. Mosley's political ascent coincided with his marriage to Lady Cynthia Simi Curzon, daughter of Lord Curzon, the former Viceroy of India. Despite Curzon's suspicions that Mosley was driven by ambition and financial gain, given Simi's substantial inheritance, he reluctantly accepted the match. His doubts proved justified. Within years, Mosley embarked on affairs with Simi's sisters, Lady Irene Curzon and Lady Alexandra Baba Metcalfe, as well as Curzon's widow Grace. After his unemployment plan was rejected by Labour, he resigned dramatically in 1930, forming the short-lived New Party. When that failed, he turned to fascism. Mosley's admiration for Mussolini led him to establish the British Union of Fascists, seeing fascism as a radical solution to Britain's struggles. His confidence, bordering on arrogance, captivated Diana, and they soon began a passionate affair. Compared to Bryan's passive idealism, Mosley's decisiveness offered the certainty she craved. Their affair intensified, dining together and confiding in each other. Diana, however, was too entranced by Mosley to concern herself with Simi's feelings, or even with Bryan's. Without hesitation, she allowed herself to be drawn further into Mosley's orbit, indifferent to the consequences. Diana's affair with Mosley was initially dismissed by their social circle as just another distraction in an otherwise conventional aristocratic marriage. Simi, accustomed to Mosley's infidelities, sensed Diana was different. Already suffering from illness and another pregnancy, she was crushed when Mosley confessed to affairs, though he spared her the knowledge that he had slept with her sisters and stepmother. Meanwhile, Bryan, helpless in the face of Diana's obsession, tried and failed to dissuade her. She dismissed monogamy as an illusion, mocking Bryan's distress. Their marriage crumbled as Diana embraced Mosley's world. That summer, Diana and Bryan traveled through Europe, but unbeknownst to Bryan, she had secretly arranged to meet Mosley in Arles. When illness delayed their plans, friends helped redirect Mosley to Venice. Once recovered, Diana joined him, immersing herself in Venice's high society, while Bryan, miserable and humiliated, watched from the sidelines. Simi, betrayed and suffering, found unexpected sympathy in Bryan. Meanwhile, Mosley, indifferent to the wreckage he caused, pursued Diana with ruthless audacity, even commandeering a friend's hotel room for their midnight trysts. The European trip confirmed Bryan's worst fears. Diana was in love with Mosley. She withdrew completely, reducing their marriage to a formality, while Bryan clung to the illusion of family life. Mosley, meanwhile, formally launched the British Union of Fascists, with his wife, Simi, overseeing propaganda efforts. Diana attended his rallies, captivated by his theatrical presence and the endorsement of figures like Lloyd George. At a lavish Biddesden ball, she flaunted her devotion to Mosley, humiliating Bryan, who pleaded for her to end the affair. Instead, she made her choice. She would leave him. However, Mosley refused to divorce Simi, offering only the role of mistress. Blinded by infatuation, Diana accepted. London society was scandalized. Even those accustomed to aristocratic affairs found Diana's actions reckless. Friends and family, especially her brother Tom and her parents, tried to intervene, fearing she was ruining her life. Colonel Guinness sided with Bryan, banning his younger daughters from seeing Diana and hiring detectives to track her. Diana, amused, dismissed the surveillance. When she finally told Bryan she was leaving, he retreated to Switzerland, forbidding Mosley from entering their home. She moved to Eaton Square near Mosley's flat, while Bryan, heartbroken, handled their financial arrangements with dignity. As Bryan grieved, Mosley remained non-committal, enjoying the affair on his terms. Even when Bryan agreed to divorce, Mosley hesitated. Then tragedy struck. Simi, weakened by illness, died of peritonitis. Though unfaithful, Mosley was devastated, turning to her sister Baba for comfort. Diana was widely blamed, with Simi's daughter later claiming her mother had lost the will to live because of her. Irene Curzon took charge of the Mosley children, vowing to keep Diana away. Mosley distanced himself, claiming he needed time to grieve. When he finally returned, he dismissed Diana's sacrifices. For the first time, she snapped, reminding him that she had lost everything for him. Meanwhile, Baba resumed her affair with Mosley, while his family actively worked to separate him from Diana. Yet, their relationship persisted in secret. Diana's divorce was finalized with staged evidence of Bryan's infidelity, though she refused financial support beyond a modest allowance. Ostracized by society, Diana found solace in Unity, the only family member who defied orders to see her. Seeking distraction, she accepted an invitation from Hitler's press secretary, Ernst Hanfstaengl, to visit Germany. She impulsively took Unity along. Unlike her past Berlin visits, Diana admired Bavaria's cultural order, while Unity became fixated on meeting Hitler. Their trip led them to the 1933 Nuremberg rally, where they were swept into 4 days of Nazi spectacle. While Diana observed with intrigue, Unity was completely mesmerized. A published photo of Unity wearing a BUF badge outraged their parents, but Diana, estranged from her family, was indifferent. Back in England, Unity's obsession with Nazism intensified. She convinced her parents to let her study in Munich, secretly joined the BUF, and collected fascist paraphernalia. Mosley, focused on expanding the BUF with financial backing from Mussolini, saw Unity as a liability and welcomed her departure. Diana, with Mosley still abroad, extended her travels to Rome, enjoying the company of her eccentric friend Lord Berners. Italy provided a temporary escape from the political chaos brewing in England. Meanwhile, Mosley established Black House, a BUF headquarters in Chelsea, and pursued propaganda filmmaking, leading to an affair with Mary Russell Tavener. As Diana traveled, his indiscretions escalated, with Tavener obsessively stalking him. When Diana and Mosley reunited in October, she remained unaware of his latest betrayals, focusing instead on her deepening admiration for fascism. Bryan, desperate to win Diana back, suggested they run away to China. She dismissed the idea. Mosley had returned, and that was all that mattered. Meanwhile, Nancy married Peter Rod, and Diana, secretly pregnant, attended the wedding while concealing her condition. With Mosley unwilling to remarry so soon after Simi's death, Diana saw no choice but to undergo an illegal abortion. By 1933, fascism had gained traction among Britain's elite, and Mosley's BUF boasted 55,000 members. Unlike the Nazis, Mosley encouraged female involvement, launching the Fascist Woman and Fascist Week. However, overwork triggered his recurring illness, leading to a secret retreat with Diana in Grasse. For 2 weeks, they enjoyed rare solitude, an illusion of the future she longed for. Returning to the eatery, she resumed her social life, sitting for Russian artist Chelichu, while maintaining friendships with Jewish acquaintances, despite Mosley's growing anti-Semitic rhetoric. Diana's relationship with Mosley deepened, though his late wife's family despised her. At Save Hay Farm, his children's nanny turned them against her, blaming her for Simi's death. Meanwhile, Mosley remained focused on politics, showing little interest in fatherhood beyond financial support. By 1934, his movement grew bolder. At a BUF rally at the Royal Albert Hall, thousands chanted, "Hail Mosley." Encouraged, he planned an even grander event at Olympia, modeled on Nuremberg. However, anti-fascist protests erupted, leading to violent clashes between black shirts and hecklers, damaging the BUF's reputation. Public support waned further after Hitler's Night of the Long Knives, exposing fascism's brutality. Diana, missing Olympia due to illness, dismissed reports of violence as media exaggeration. As Mosley's movement faltered, she worked to bolster his morale. Seeking escape, they traveled to France, enraging Mosley's late wife's family. He managed tensions by carefully coordinating his mistresses, first taking Baba to maintain appearances, then joining Diana in Toulon. Afterward, Diana traveled to Italy, staying with Edward James at Villa Cimbrone, while Bryan, still heartbroken, sent her melancholic letters reminiscing about their past. From Italy, Diana visited Unity in Munich, where her sister proudly revealed she had finally seen Hitler. Unlike Diana's previous Berlin experiences, Unity's life in Germany was carefree, filled with art classes, language lessons, and nights at the opera. Determined to meet Hitler, Unity insisted they attend the Nuremberg rally. By sheer luck, an elderly Nazi official secured them tickets and accommodations. Watching the spectacle, Unity recognized a young woman in a white Mercedes, Eva Braun, Hitler's mistress. The rally's overwhelming propaganda, filled with red flags and militaristic displays, enthralled Unity. Though Diana understood little German, Unity eagerly translated Hitler's speeches, highlighting economic successes that mirrored Mosley's vision for Britain. Convinced fascism was the future, Diana resolved to learn German to better communicate Hitler's oratory techniques to Mosley. Diana settled in Munich, inviting Unity to live with her, freeing her from a dreary boarding house. They spent their days studying German and lingering at Osteria, Bavaria, hoping for a chance encounter with Hitler. Unity's obsession intensified. When Tom Mitford jokingly claimed he had met Hitler first, she reacted with rage. Their attempts to see Hitler were repeatedly thwarted, leading to mounting frustration. When their maid inadvertently secured the best view of him at a Nazi ceremony, Unity's temper flared, much to Diana's amusement. As winter set in, Diana admired Germany's efficiency, but frustrated by their failed mission, returned to England before Christmas. She spent the holiday at Gerald Berner's Farringdon house, surrounded by eccentric guests, including the reclusive Gladys, Duchess of Marlborough, whose botched plastic surgery had left her a shadow of her former self. Meanwhile, the Mitford family's political divisions deepened. To Diana's shock, even her parents softened their stance on Hitler. Sidney admired Munich's order, and Unity boasted that their father, David, had reconsidered his anti-German views. 14-year-old Deborah argued for fascism at school, horrifying their communist sister Jessica, who severed ties with Diana entirely. Nancy retaliated by writing Whigs on the Green, a satirical novel mocking fascism. Though Eugenia, the main character, was modeled after Unity, Diana saw it as a betrayal. Then, astonishing news arrived. Unity had finally met Hitler. One afternoon at Osteria, Bavaria, his aide approached her announcing, "The Führer would like to speak to you." Over lunch, Hitler spoke about his admiration for cavalcade and his belief that Jews must never again pit Nordic races against each other. Ecstatic, Unity wrote to Diana, urging her to come to Munich immediately. With Mosley's movement struggling, he saw an opportunity for German support and encouraged Diana to cultivate these connections. Meanwhile, Mosley's enemies, particularly Irene Curzon, blamed Diana for his growing ties to Hitler, accusing her of using her family to gain political influence. Diana's 1935 journey to Munich in a car gifted by Mosley symbolized the freedom she had sought since leaving Bryan. Stranded in snow, she stubbornly enlisted a peasant's help, determined not to be deterred. On March 11th, she met Hitler. His unremarkable appearance contrasted with his magnetism, particularly over those around him. Contrary to his fiery public persona, he was polite, bowing, and ensuring her comfort at lunch. She found herself intrigued by his piercing blue-gray eyes, as many before her had. Hitler was equally fascinated by the Mitfords, charmed by their aristocratic ease. Diana insisted Unity's blunt humor, not blind infatuation, made her stand out. Shortly after, she left for Paris, visiting Bryan and their children, while Unity remained in Germany, boasting about Mosley to Hitler. Her influence secured Mosley a private meeting, a major diplomatic victory Diana had helped orchestrate. Meanwhile, Mosley's rhetoric became increasingly anti-Semitic, drawing Nazi interest. At a Leicester rally, he vilified Jewish influence, cementing his extremist reputation. That summer, Diana nearly died in a car crash. After drinking at a dinner party, she set off in her Voisin, only for a speeding Rolls-Royce to send her head through the windscreen. Rushed to St. George's Hospital, she pleaded to call Mosley, terrified he would read of the accident in the papers. Her injuries were severe, but Bryan, ever devoted, arranged for Sir Harold Gillies to reconstruct her face using a 1930 life mask. As friends mourned her beauty, Mosley fled to Naples with Baba. Determined to reach Mosley, Diana plotted her escape from the hospital. Her father, despite despising Mosley, admired her resilience and helped smuggle her to Croydon Airfield. She arrived in Naples to find Mosley had orchestrated Baba's presence as well, ensuring inevitable confrontation. Baba, confident in her status, remained dominant, while Diana, unknowingly pregnant again, felt sidelined. Mosley's erratic parenting at Save-Hay, firing gunshots at the dog, pacing naked in the garden, further highlighted his detachment. Still, he refused to marry Diana, and after another dangerous abortion, she demanded commitment. He reluctantly agreed to an engagement, offering little more than an empty promise. Meanwhile, Unity had fully embedded herself in Hitler's circle, regaling him with tales of the sisters' struggles to meet him due to their makeup. Hitler, amused, invited them to the 1935 Parteitag. He also instructed Himmler to invite Nancy and Peter Rod to a concentration camp tour. Nancy scoffed, while Jessica, a committed communist, refused. Pamela and Deborah visited Hitler but were unimpressed. Pamela found him dull, and Deborah was more interested in his monogrammed towels. Back in England, Churchill summoned Diana for a debate on Italy, British sanctions, and the Abyssinian War. She found his belief in naval superiority naive, but refrained from pressing further. Her distrust of Britain's foreign policy deepened, fueled by reports from Gerald Berners in Rome. Meanwhile, Mosley aligned more closely with Nazi Germany. His interview in the Fränkische Tageszeitung warned of the Jewish danger across nations, coinciding with Hitler's Nuremberg laws, which stripped Jews of their rights. Mosley's rebranded British Union of Fascists and National Socialists mirrored Nazi ideology, further alienating the British public. Despite Mosley's growing extremism, Diana remained loyal. While Hitler maintained an air of control, Mosley incited chaos he could not contain. BUF rallies turned violent, most infamously at Olympia, where black shirts brutally beat anti-fascist protesters. Diana dismissed these reports, believing Mosley's claims that Jewish agitators provoked the violence. Unlike Hitler, who framed fascism around racial purity, Mosley originally emphasized economic nationalism, but his rhetoric increasingly mirrored Nazi ideology. Diana, once an independent thinker, had fully embraced his vision, convinced fascism was Britain's only salvation. In 1935, Hitler honored his promise to the Mitford sisters, inviting them as guests of honor to Parteitag. At a pre-event gathering, they were introduced alongside Leni Riefenstahl and Frau Trost as precious specimens. Seated near Eva Braun, Diana witnessed Hitler announce the Nuremberg laws. Unlike in 1933, she now understood German fluently and fully grasped the law's implications. Rather than recoil, she justified them by comparing them to Old Testament precedents, reaffirming her unwavering support for Hitler and Mosley. Back in England, Diana's defiant fascist salute at a Hyde Park rally nearly led to an attack before BU members intervened. With Unity already notorious for her ties to Hitler, Diana's public display solidified her controversial role. As London rejected fascism, Mosley turned north, seeking support among the unemployed. His frequent absences led Diana to consider relocating, though she continued her visits to Germany. Unity's fanaticism proved useful, promoting Mosley's cause to Hitler. Seeking financial backing, Mosley eyed the Nazi regime as a potential sponsor. Meanwhile, Irene Curzon, resentful of Diana's growing influence, feared being pushed aside. Rumors spread that Diana planned to move her sons into Save-Hay, replacing Irene with a governess. Though untrue, Irene's hostility deepened. Instead, Diana sought her own home with Mosley, away from Baba's interference. She fell in love with Wootton Lodge, a grand 17th century house, securing the lease despite financial constraints. To furnish it, she reluctantly sold a ruby and diamond bracelet from Bryan, a painful but necessary sacrifice. Mosley adjusted his living arrangements, moving into a former nightclub that Diana elegantly redecorated. Even Irene, her staunchest critic, acknowledged her impeccable taste. However, tensions flared when Irene sabotaged Diana's planned holiday with Mosley, forcing him to cancel her invitation, only for Baba to refuse to go as well. Amid his grueling schedule, Mosley suffered an appendicitis attack, raising concerns given Simi's fate. Recovering in Sorrento, he was joined by his domineering mother, Ma Mosley, who saw Diana as a threat to her influence. Meanwhile, the BUF escalated anti-Semitic terror campaigns in London's East End, debating the forced deportation of Jews. Irene, increasingly horrified by Mosley's racism, was appalled when he justified anti-Semitism as a necessary tool for recruitment. Undeterred, Diana traveled to Berlin, staying at Goebbels' villa, once home to wealthy Jewish families before Nazi expropriation. She admired its beauty while Unity reveled in its symbolism. Magda Goebbels intrigued Diana with her elegance, but revealed a ruthless side, dismissing a suicidal maid as weak. Goebbels himself resented Diana's direct access to Hitler and exaggerated her requests for Nazi funding, though MI5 later confirmed Hitler provided financial aid to the BUF. As Berlin prepared for the 1936 Olympics, Nazi Germany temporarily sanitized its image, removing anti-Semitic signs and allowing Jewish and Black athletes to compete to avoid a boycott. Diana and Unity attended, more interested in Hitler's motorcade than the games themselves. At Bayreuth, Diana bonded with Winifred Wagner, while Unity was dismissed as overly exuberant. Diana also pitched Airtime Limited, a propaganda radio station disguised as a commercial enterprise selling household goods. During this visit, Diana and Unity learned of Hitler's long secret affair with Eva Braun. Realizing Hitler disapproved of her unmarried status, Diana and Mosley began planning their wedding. As European tensions escalated, Mosley capitalized on Britain's political crisis, rallying support for King Edward VIII, while Hitler privately disapproved of Edward's scandal with Wallace Simpson. Seeking secrecy, Hitler arranged Diana and Mosley's marriage in Berlin, with Magda Goebbels handling the arrangements. Amid these personal maneuvers, Mosley staged his most infamous political act. On October 4, 1936, he led a BUF march through London's Jewish East End. Tens of thousands of anti-fascists blocked his path, chanting, "They shall not pass." The Battle of Cable Street descended into chaos as protesters clashed with blackshirts, forcing police to intervene. The humiliating defeat led to Parliament passing the Public Order Act, banning fascist uniforms and restricting marches, crippling the BUF. Furious, Mosley likened it to Germany's failed suppression of Hitler before retreating to Berlin. Diana, now estranged from Nancy over her mockery of Mosley, instead grew closer to Unity, who had become entangled with Janos von Almazy, a Hungarian aristocrat obsessed with the occult. At Bernstein Castle, Janos charted Hitler's horoscope, predicting catastrophe and suicide, an ominous foreshadowing. Meanwhile, Diana confided in Unity about her secret wedding, held on October 6, 1936. Unlike her grand first wedding, this ceremony was a private affair in a Berlin bedroom, attended only by Hitler, the Goebbels, and Unity. Hitler gifted them a signed portrait and orchids, but tensions arose when Mosley, irritated by Hitler's dominance, compared him to Ramsay MacDonald, angering Diana. Their wedding night ended in arguments, foreshadowing future struggles. Mosley concealed the marriage, even from his children, who only learned of it through the press. Baba, discovering it on a train, seethed with fury, while Irene, returning from America, confronted Mosley. Though angered by his deception, she was ultimately swayed by Vivian's perspective that Diana made Mosley happy, warning only that he must never betray his children again. Meanwhile, Diana, pregnant and increasingly isolated, retreated to Wootton Lodge, away from public scrutiny. In November 1938, she gave birth to Alexander Mosley in their Grosvenor Road flat. Her joy was quickly overshadowed by paranoia when a nurse placed the newborn outside on the balcony, triggering fears of seagulls snatching him. Despite speculation, Mosley and Diana continued denying their marriage until Mosley finally confirmed it alongside the birth of their son, provoking widespread outrage. Even Irene, still resentful, made an uneasy visit to Wootton, where she was appalled by the portraits of Hitler and Goering on the mantelpiece. Yet despite her disdain, she softened upon seeing baby Alexander. As war loomed in 1939, Mosley remained blind to shifting political tides. Financial strains mounted when legal advisors refused to let him fund Wootton's upkeep through his children's trust. Desperate, he sought financial aid from Irene, who refused. As Britain declared war on Germany, Mosley continued his pacifist campaign, drawing large crowds but deepening public suspicion. His association with William Joyce, later infamous as Lord Haw Haw, further damaged his reputation. Diana blamed Churchill for prioritizing war over diplomacy, but the public had turned against them. On September 3, 1939, Unity attempted suicide, devastated by the war between the nations she adored. She shot herself with a pistol given to her by Hitler, but survived with a bullet lodged in her brain. Hitler covered her medical expenses but severed ties. Sidney retrieved her from a Swiss clinic, and her return to England without police scrutiny caused a national scandal. The Mitford family fractured. Nancy and Jessica blamed Diana for leading Unity into dangerous politics, while their father, David, condemned Hitler in the House of Lords, permanently dividing him from Sidney, who still admired the Führer. On May 28, 1948, nearly 9 years after her suicide attempt, Unity Mitford succumbed to meningitis, a result of the persistent cerebral swelling caused by the bullet which was still lodged in her skull. She was 33 years old. Financial struggles forced Diana and Mosley to downsize, moving to Dolphin Square, where she gave birth to their second son, Max. They later returned to Savehay, a move Diana loathed. She erased all traces of Jimmy, but tensions remained, especially with Mosley's estranged son, Mickey, who barely knew his father. On May 23, 1940, Mosley was arrested under wartime regulations. Convinced it was a mistake, Diana carried on her day, only to have her home raided that evening. Winston Churchill, once a family ally, deemed Mosley a national threat. Irene fought for custody of Mosley's children and won, deepening the animosity. Meanwhile, Diana's governess, Jean Gillies, had secretly recorded her pro-Nazi sentiments and reported them to Colonel Guinness. Armed with this evidence, the government ordered Diana's arrest. On June 29, 1940, as she read in her garden, officers arrived with a warrant. Pleading that she had a newborn, she was told she could bring him, but chose to leave Max behind. Assured it was temporary, she kissed her children goodbye and was taken to Holloway Prison. Stripped of privilege, she endured fingerprinting, delousing, and a medical examination before being placed in a filthy cell. Days stretched into months. Refusing prison food, she slept upright against damp walls, drawing support only from BUF women who remained loyal when others had abandoned her. Summoned before the advisory committee, she was asked why she believed she had been arrested. Her reply, "Because I married Sir Oswald Mosley." After over a year, she and Mosley were reunited in a special arrangement at Holloway, living together in a small block. They found ways to create routine. He tended the boiler, she grew vegetables. Despite press outrage over their conditions, prison life was bleak. She stopped seeing her sons after Alexander's tearful plea not to leave him again. Mosley's health deteriorated, and after repeated appeals, a doctor's dire report finally led to their release in November 1943. When Diana received the news, she abandoned her porridge and ran to Mosley's bedside in disbelief. Though they had lost everything, she saw their freedom as a chance to rebuild, calling their prison reunion one of the happiest days of her life. In 1947, Mosley published The Alternative, presenting his vision of a unified Europe with Africa as its economic base. Declaring himself beyond both fascism and democracy, he claimed to avoid forming a new political movement. However, within months, he launched the Union movement, driven by loyal followers who had suffered imprisonment for their beliefs. His return to politics reignited street clashes, with young supporters mimicking pre-war BUF demonstrations. At a 1947 reunion of old BUF members, Mosley was greeted with adulation, confirming his enduring appeal among die-hard loyalists. In 1948, Mosley officially launched Union Movement, promoting Europe a Nation. Though he distanced himself from explicit anti-Semitism, many of his followers remained openly anti-Jewish, leading to violent confrontations with anti-fascist groups like the Jewish 43. By the 1950s, Mosley's primary platform shifted to opposing non-white immigration. His influence, however, remained limited. Even among supporters, extremist rhetoric often overshadowed his attempts at a more polished image. By the early 1950s, Mosley and Diana, tired of Britain's hostility, moved to Ireland, drawn by its tax leniency and their aristocratic connections. They purchased Clonfert Palace, an ancient house in need of complete renovation. Simultaneously, they acquired Temple de la Gloire, an 1800 neoclassical house outside Paris, where Diana indulged her love for grand interiors. Their nomadic lifestyle took them between Ireland, France, and Venice, where they socialized with exiled European aristocrats, including the Duke and Duchess of Windsor. Mosley remained politically active, forging links with fascist groups in Spain, South Africa, and Italy, though his influence waned. By 1962, even he accepted that his vision for a united fascist Europe was unrealistic. Instead, he and Diana focused on curating a life of luxury, filling their homes with fine food, furniture, and art. Their sons, however, struggled with this unconventional upbringing. Educated erratically by tutors and fleeting school placements, Max embraced hunting in Ireland, while Alexander, intellectually restless, grew disillusioned and rebellious. In 1954, their Irish home, Clonfert, was destroyed by fire, prompting another move to Islaclash in County Cork. By 1963, realizing they spent most of their time abroad, they sold it and settled between Temple de la Gloire and a London flat. During this period, Diana became an editor, launching The European, a publication aimed at rehabilitating Mosley's ideas. It ran for 6 years, featuring intellectual debates, literary reviews, and critiques of political opponents, but failed to gain traction. In the late 1950s, Mosley re-entered British politics, running for Parliament on an anti-immigration platform. Campaigning in Notting Hill, he relied on provocative rhetoric, but public rejection was overwhelming. After resounding defeats in 1959 and 1966, he withdrew from political life. Instead, he focused on his memoir, My Life, 1968, which Diana meticulously edited, ensuring it was his most readable work. By then, he had become a historical curiosity rather than a political threat. Diana's own memoir, A Life of Contrasts, 1977, was well received but heavily criticized for its unapologetic portrayal of Hitler. Though she called the Holocaust appalling, wicked, monstrous, she never fully renounced her past, deflecting criticism by comparing Hitler's crimes to those of Stalin and Mao. Her later works, including The Duchess of Windsor, 1980, and Loved Ones, 1985, cemented her reputation as a skilled writer, though always controversial. After his attempts to revive fascism failed, they retreated to France, where they lived in semi-exile. Despite his continued infidelities, Diana remained loyal to the end. Mosley's health declined in the 1970s due to Parkinson's disease, and he died in 1980. Diana was devastated, struggling to recover. A year later, she was diagnosed with a brain tumor and underwent surgery. Eventually, she found stability in a quieter life, surrounded by grandchildren, reviewing books, and maintaining her carefully curated social world. Diana remained estranged from Jessica after 1936, speaking only briefly when Nancy was on her deathbed in 1973. Despite this, she stayed in frequent contact with her other sisters, mostly through letters, maintaining a connection even as their lives took drastically different paths. In 1983, she encountered Bryan Guinness in the House of Lords. Frail and disheveled, he recognized her instantly, kissing her in an affectionate reunion free of past bitterness. "Which of you is it?" he asked, reflecting the duality of her life. Beloved friend to some, unwavering fascist to others. After Mosley's death in 1980, she defended his legacy, unapologetic to the end. Even in her final years, she remained enigmatic, charming to some, sinister to others. She died on August 11, 2003, at the age of 93, forever defined by her unwavering loyalty to Mosley, fascism, and a past she never disavowed. So, what are your thoughts on the scandalous life of Diana Mosley? And what do you make of her lifelong devotion to Sir Oswald Mosley? What was it about him that held her in his thrall? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment. and I'll be sure to reply. As always, thank you for watching. Until next time, keep seeking the stories that move your soul.